One of the privileges of being the program chair for this symposium, that is the person who gets to choose all the speakers and put it all together, means that I can be entirely selfish and put speakers in there who I want in. And Dr. Trent Smith was one of those speakers. I've found myself over the last year or so taking a bit more of an interest in behavioural economics, an area I know absolutely nothing about. So when I started to put this program together, I go, I want a behavioural economics speaker in here. Hence, Dr. Trent Smith. Just pull his profile up. So Trent Smith is a senior lecturer in economics at the University of Otago. So he's a bit of a local lad here, sort of. Dr. Smith's research interests are broadly interdisciplinary, applying economic methods in biological perspective to better understand behavioural phenomena that would seem to violate the economist's conventional presumptions of rationality and full information. I don't know what any of that means, so he's going to tell us. Dr. Trent Smith.
Okay, so there's this conventional wisdom out there that you'll often see repeated in newspaper articles and magazine articles about the obesity epidemic. And so it goes something like this. Humans evolved in a world in which calories were scarce. Today, we've had all this technological process. Now calories are abundant, hence we have obesity. So there are a couple of problems with this. So first of all, it very explicitly embeds sort of two of the food industry's favorite talking points. That's another thing I do research on is food industry talking points. So the food industry, of course, gets very defensive when you talk about the obesity epidemic, and right, they want to say, hey, this isn't our fault. And so they have a very well-honed set of talking points that they go and spread around the world. So the two that I would argue are embedded in this conventional wisdom are one that obesity is about calories, right? You shouldn't think about product quality, you should just think about calories, right? And that does kind of absolve the industry of blame, if you believe it. And then the other is sort of a deeper claim that as the industry, we're just responding to what consumers want, or we're just providing what consumers want. Okay. So that's one knock against this conventional wisdom, right? It's sort of two industry talking points rolled into one. The second knock on it, I think, is that it's so simplistic as to arguably just be wrong. And so today I'm going to talk about, I'm going to sort of talk you through a more nuanced view of how evolutionary history and diet interact, and maybe get a smidgen of economics in here as well. So I'm going to talk about, the anthropologists always talk about adaptive problems. If you want to understand how evolution affected evolutionary history has shaped us today, you have to sort of identify the adaptive problems that humans were solving in evolutionary history. The two I want to talk about is first briefly starvation risks, because this is if you want to choose one adaptive problem that's most related to modern obesity, it's going to be that one, right? So. And so the adaptive response to starvation risk would be to identify the cues in your environment that are signaling the possibility of future starvation, and then fatten when those cues occur. And the other one is malnutrition and/or food safety, right? So there's this problem where there are all these objects. Your children are born into the world. There are all these objects in the world that they could or could not pick up and put it into their mouth, chew and eat, incorporate into their diet in the future. But of course, many of the objects in the world are going to be poisonous, right, or pathogens. There's also this nutrition problem, right? You have to get all the essential micronutrients in your diet. Okay, so first of all, this starvation risk problem. I have a paper on this subject, but you can read the anthropology literature, and there's a whole literature on famine foods, right? So there's big catalogs of what foods hunter-gatherer groups eat when they're down to their last bite of food, right? When they're down to when all the good foods are gone, what do they eat? It turns out they eat mostly carbohydrates, right? So these are a group in Africa cooking some tubers over the fire there. And then if you look at sort of the metabolic effects of eating carbohydrate-rich foods, probably people in this room are probably pretty well well versed in this subject. Right, so the diagram on the right here is glycemic response on the top there, and insulin response on the bottom. And of course, what happens? You eat a high glycemic, and it's time on the horizontal axis here. You eat a high glycemic food, you get a spike in blood sugar. Your pancreas responds by secreting a bunch of insulin, right? And the insulin has the effect of bringing the blood sugar back down. Now, the problem with insulin is it actually tends to stimulate your appetite, right? So if you get out here, in this example, sort of 2 to 3 hours out beyond where you had this glycemic shock, you get to this point where your blood sugar falls down below baseline. You get hungry, right? You actually stimulated your appetite by eating this food in the first place. And of course, lipogenesis, right? People who get put on insulin therapy for medical reasons or wherever, they tend to, they can gain 20, 30 pounds within a few weeks just from insulin injections. This is just a cellular, the endocrinologists talk about it as if it's a cellular starvation response, right? The insulin makes your body think it's starving and shunts energy to body fat. So you could interpret this evidence as that this sort of response to these starchy foods, carbohydrate, high glycemic foods, is in fact an adaptive response that humans in sort of an evolutionary history, when they encountered these foods in their diet, right, it would have only been in situations in which starvation was imminent, right? So it would have been a good time to fatten. Right? So this could actually be an adaptive response we're seeing. Now, whether you believe that story or not, this is important because, right, we've identified an aspect of food that stimulates appetite, right? That's something the food industry is obviously going to care about, right? And if you look, the endocrinologists who have looked at the physiological effects of eating highly processed fast foods and so forth, high glycemic index is one of the universal features of these foods. Okay, so that's the example I have for starvation risk. This sort of malnutrition problem, the food safety and malnutrition problem, is a bit more general. It probably has a bigger effect on how people choose foods. Although this might not be as closely related to obesity as the example I just gave you. So I've got a paper on this as well. So and what I do what I've done in my research is to sort of read all the behavioral psychology on what cues children rely upon to choose foods. And so I'm going to sort those cues into 3 categories for you: post-ingestive cues, or health effects after the meal. Chemical cues, right? So the chemicals in food that we literally have receptors on our tongue to detect, and then imitative cues. Right? You see your parents or your peers eating a food, you're more likely to eat the food. Okay, so I'll run you through these examples. So post-ingestive nausea. So most people can give examples of a food that yes, I ate that food and then I became sick, and ever since then I haven't wanted to touch that food. It's a very strong effect. It can last for years. Even if you can demonstrate it in laboratories and things. Even if you consciously, rationally know that the food wasn't what made you sick, the aversion can remain, right? So it's not this is sort of a classic. These are the classic features of what the anthropologists call an evolutionary vestige, right? It's a behavior that doesn't really necessarily come from rationality. It comes at the level of sort of visceral emotions. There's also there's a smaller literature on post-ingestive satiety, and it's possible that glycemic effects are related to this, but you can show that foods that make you can become habituated to flavors that are associated with post-ingestive satiety. So it's pretty easy to see, I think, that these behaviors might have been adaptive in the pre-industrial world. Right? If you got sick after eating a novel food, there's probably a pretty good chance in that world that it was the food that made you sick. And so might be a good idea to avoid it. Even if it wasn't true, it still might not hurt to avoid it, right? There are a lot of other foods out there. Yeah, there's actually some interesting experiments with rats where they fed rats thiamine deficient diets, right? So the thiamine's a B vitamin, it's missing from this rat chow. The rats actually develop an aversion to this thiamine deficient food, right? Because it's missing a nutrient, and they become ill, right? And they'll actually start to eat their own feces rather than continue to eat this food on which they've become ill. And it turns out that is adaptive for the rats because there actually is thiamine in their feces. So even sort of malnutrition can apparently lead foraging animals to avoid particular foods or to seek out new foods. Okay, chemical cues. So in school you might have learned about the 4 basic tastes or the 5 basic tastes, depending on when you went to school. There's some thought there might be more now. But these are just tastes that like I said, we literally have chemical receptors for on our tongues. And there's lots of behavioral research on how these basic tastes are related to to behavior. One of the strongest ones is a preference for sweet. Right, human infants within hours of birth, you can demonstrate that they appear to have a preference for sweet tastes. Preference for salt tends to come a little later. Right? Umami is MSG, or glutamate. And then sours and bitters we tend to have aversions for. Okay? And so was this kind of thing adaptive in the pre-industrial world? The easiest example is probably sugar, right? So if you think about where you would find sugars in the pre-industrial world, it would be in ripe fruit, in raw honey, and in mother's milk. And so essentially you can think of it as a perfect signal of valuable micronutrients of nutritional quality. And you could say the same things about salt and umami fairly plausibly. A sour taste is a potential indicator of a spoiled food. Bitter is interesting because the foods that taste bitter to us, they're actually very chemically diverse, but they all tend to be like neurotoxins or chemically related to neurotoxins. Right? So again, it would be adaptive to avoid these foods if you taste those flavors. Okay, last one is imitative cues. So I have lots of examples on this. I'll run you through them. You can do things like teach human infants to have a preference for garlic or vanilla or something like this by feeding garlic or vanilla to the mother, right? Either in utero or via the mother's milk after birth. You can do. There's a small literature where they've done experiments with children where they'll expose the children. They'll have a child watch his friend pick up the piece of broccoli and then measure how likely it is that the second child is likely to pick up the broccoli. It's a pretty easy thing to demonstrate. Fascinating series of studies by Wanda Wirwicka where she did is and I don't know if you can see the picture here, she inserted electrodes into the brain of this mother cat here, house cat. And what they did is cats are normally carnivorous, right? So they normally wouldn't eat bananas, as you see this cat eating in this picture. But every time this mother cat got near the bananas, they would stimulate the pleasure center in her brain using these electrodes. So they essentially got her to eat these bananas in her cage. And then you probably can't see this either. There's her little kitten here is on the left, also right with no electrodes in the brain, but the little kitten has also developed a preference for these bananas. Right, that's a bowl full of meat on the right there that they're both ignoring. This was in a zoo in Japan. These deer were raised in a pen with flamingos. Evidently, the deer saw the flamingos eating fish, and the deer started eating fish as well. That's something you would normally see in nature. Sheep normally eat grass. You can train the mother sheep to eat wheat instead, and the baby sheep follow, lambs follow. This is a famous study by McCoy and Gallup. So they took baby chickens, put them in a pen, and let them look through a screen at at other baby chickens eating from a particular dish on the other side, and they were able to show that when you remove the other baby chickens and you remove the screen, the chickens who had been exposed to the site in the first place run straight to the dish that had been where the others had been eating. So social learning there. Where this got a little devious is when they substituted the real chickens for television chickens, and they now the chickens are looking through the screen at a video screen of the chickens eating from a particular bowl, and then they remember the bowl, right? They remember the shape of the bowl, and then they run straight to the bowl and they have the opportunity. Okay, this is pretty obviously it's something that would have been adaptive in the pre-industrial world. All right, if there are all these objects in the world, which one should I pick up and eat? Right, as a young human, of course you'd want to pay attention to what your older brother or sister is eating and what your parents are eating. This would be the first place to start. There's also it's also been noted that local food cultures around the world often have nutritional benefits, right? So things like processing corn into masa in Latin America makes the niacin in the corn more available, right? So it prevents pellagra. There are places in the world, same with processing soy into curd, removes toxins. Places where the diet is mineral deficient, you'll often see geophagia as part of the eating soil as part of the local food culture. Okay, so this leads me to my research on television advertisements for food. I have a particular interest in advertisements aimed at children. I'm going to show you a couple of ads here. And so the game here is that you want to think, of course these are set in the modern world, but you want to think, if I were a child in the pre-industrial world and I saw this scene playing out before me, what would it tell me about the food, right? What would it tell me about the food that's being shown here? Okay, I hope this works.
We're playing ball when it happened. That just grows. So we took him to the feeding station. We tried to be cool. Hands smooth. But we knew only one thing would satisfy Fred's immediate needs. McDonald's Mighty Kids meals. Which everyone knows is Fred's favorite food. Suddenly, Fred was fine. Mighty hungry, Mighty Kids meals. Got another one.
Now you can get a Lilo and Stitch bobblehead toy, only at McDonald's.
Okay, so Fred is sick, right? He's non-responsive. What cures him? Right? The product being advertised, sure. Okay, second one.
Caring is sharing, it can be fun
I'll give you some.
when you have none.
There's nothing more important under the sun.
The caring is sharing, it can be fun. Caring is sharing, it can be. Caring is sharing, it can be.
Okay, so that's pretty simple scenario, right? One character snatches the product and runs off with it, and the other one chases and tackles. It's a fairly common theme in children's advertisements. Okay. So the first one, the first ad I showed you there, I call the medical miracle. Character consumes the food and becomes visibly more healthy somehow. Improvement in mood or health. Squabble. Another common one is the hidden treasure. I'm running low on time, so I won't show you one of those. But again, if a child in the pre-industrial world had seen these, it would have been a pretty strong signal that, yeah, that's a food that you want to have in your diet. Okay, so I'm an economist, so I need to make sure I earn my pay and get a little economics into my lecture here. I want to explain how economists might think about this, or how I think about it. So there's a very well-known economic problem called the Lemons equilibrium in economics. And the classic example is markets for used cars, and it's what economists call asymmetric information, right? Buyers and sellers have different information about their product. And it can lead to this market breakdown, right? Where if you can't believe what the seller of the used car is telling you about the quality of his car, you're not going to be willing to pay a premium for it. Right? As a result, people with the really high quality cars aren't able to command the corresponding price. They withdraw their cars from the market. You wind up with only lemons for sale. Right? It's a collapse of the high quality market. So all you have is low quality products for sale. in the marketplace. And economists think this is actually a pretty big problem, right? It's not just used car markets. There have been lots of other examples in which this is used. And there are fairly well established solutions to this in economics, right? So the main one being that if you have this problem, you want to have what you need is a credible third-party quality verification system, right? So in New Zealand, we have AA inspections in the used car market, right, which partially solves that problem. Right? So the problem with what's happening in the food industry that I just told you about today is what I call the McDonald's equilibrium. I actually have a paper by that title. And the problem here is that these cues that are embedded in the food and the food marketing represent an evolutionary mismatch, right? It's as if they're false cues, as if they're providing false information about the quality of the product, right? And again, you have the result is low quality products dominate the market. Okay, so this is the world we live in. I'd argue is the world of the McDonald's equilibrium, but the sort of the deeper message is that if you look at children's behavior, it does seem that you could interpret their behavior as really wanting to consume healthy foods, right? It's as if they want to, but they're being misinformed about this. There are the parallels with the Lemons equilibrium are that both seem to involve what you might call deception and potentially fraud if you define fraud broadly enough. And so there are some fairly easy legislative solutions to this problem that I won't get into. In terms of sort of personal health advice, this is what I'll offer you: is that you should understand that these cues out there in the world are misleading and do what you can to avoid them. Okay, thanks.